Thank you, Rosalba.
For joining us.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Cinzia Colombo, and I work at the Negri Institute in Milan as a researcher. Can you hear me well? Yes. I am the head of a unit research with citizens for disease prevention and care, and I'm very happy to moderate this session. As you've seen from the agenda, we have invited many speakers from different disciplines and also fields, asking them to bring their perspective into the discussion. The discussion will be at the end of a session of all the presentations. So we are asking you to put in the chat your question or comments, and we will go through them at the end of this session. So now let's start with the first speaker. I'm glad to give the floor to Christoph Schickhardt, that is a researcher at the National Center for Tumor Diseases in Heidelberg, Germany, in the section Translational Medical Ethics. And Dr. Schickhardt will approach our topic from an ethical perspective. So, Dr. Schickhardt, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Do you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Perfect. So I try.
Oh, okay. Here you are. Thank you.
I try to share my screen. Take some time. Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for having me, and hello to everybody. Well, I have been working in the field of ethics and governance of secondary use of research data and treatment data for 12 years now. So I need to be very brief and put 10 years into 10 minutes. I hope I will stay within the time limit, and hope that these slides will be of some help for the further discussions. So let's see. Okay, so what do we talk about when we talk about secondary use of patient or health data? I think it is important to be very clear about these central concepts, and I think we have to distinguish two worlds, two contexts. So first of all, there is the context of individual care, of treatment of patients. And in the world of medical care, we generate data for the purpose of individual diagnosis and treatment. This can be a routine treatment, but it can also be an off-label treatment or an experimental treatment. However, it is for the sake of the patient's individual well-being. The original context is clinical care. In this clinical care, we generate data, and we can, of course, use this data not only for care purpose, but also for research. That would be, so, for example, observational research, registers research, or other learning activities about quality of care and that stuff. And the second world is the world of research, where we, from the beginning, generate data for research purposes. For example, within a clinical interventional trial. In this context, we have a concise, precise, specific research project, and we generate data within this research project for the purpose of research. But then, of course, in a further way, we can use the data generated in that specific research project for further research, or at least research-driven data analysis. So I think it is important to distinguish these two worlds. On the one hand, you have real-world data from clinical care. On the other hand, you have the research world, and you can do a secondary research use of both data coming from both worlds. Of course, you usually need to ask patients for consent if you want to use their data. And the golden standard of consent is the specific informed consent. That is, for example, the consent for an interventional clinical trial. So you inform the patient about a specific project, about all the specific risks and benefits and persons involved. and ask for specific consent to that specific project. But there have also been established other consent models that comes with the establishment of biobank-driven research and data-driven research. So if you want to ask the patient for a more and a broader consent, you can use the tiered consent. Within the tiered consent model, you offer the patient different options to consent or reject. So for example, you can ask the patient, can we use your data for oncological research purposes or maybe for general medical research purposes? Can we use and share your data within Italy or Germany or even abroad in Europe or even abroad from Europe? So you offer different options. If you want to do all in one moment or in one with one question, you use a broad consent model. So you just ask the patient to use the data for future different research projects without specifying the single research projects. So you more or less simply ask the patient, can we use your data for future research within the next maybe 20 or 30 years for research projects that will be there in the future. And because of the broad consent is a one-time contact with the patient, allowing a lot of things, there has been some criticisms of it, and the dynamic consent has been developed. So the dynamic consent seems to be maybe something that you have in mind or has familiarities with what you have in mind when you recontact patients for data projects. So for each single research project that would like to use the patient's data, you come back electronically to the patient and ask him or her if she or he allows the use of the data within the specific project. So there's a continuous forth and back between a center and the patient, and you ask for allowance and for consent for every new research project. And then as a meta, then you have the meta consent. The meta consent is a model where the patient can choose what kind of consent he or she prefers, what kind of ways to be approached and to be asked and informed about research project she or her prefers. All consent types can be implemented in an electronic way. Some can also be implemented in a paper-based way or in a mixed way. However, the dynamic consent and the meta consent require IT-based approaches. For example, via smartphone applications, because for each new project that would like to use the patient's data, you need to recontact the patient. And the dynamic consent implies remote IT-based and remote communication of the information about an individual project, and also to have the consent or the rejection of the patient. So there is a IT-based and remote communication. In Germany, we have one big national initiative that has been established and has been setting up since 2018 that tries to make the treatment data of all patients in all hospitals of all universities available for research purposes. So here we try on a national level to connect and share and make available treatment data from patients. And to have a legal and ethical basis to do that, we have developed a national standardized broad consent for research use of patient data. This is a national broad consent that has been rolled out in all hospitals in Germany at all university sites, and it has gained the approval by the German National Data Protection Conference. And it follows an module approach. So there's a basic version of the broad consent, and further modules can be added, for example, to ask patients also for the allowance of storage and using biomaterial for research. If you want to read more about this, there's a quite comprehensible publication out that explains this broad consent approach. Of course, what we witness in the reality of research is that researchers often want to have both and to connect both treatment data, so real-world patient data on the one side, and clinical trial data or other research data, so data that are being generated for research purposes. And of course, this comes with new challenges, but it is possible, for example, to have a clinical trial with a specific informed consent and to ask the patient also to allow to connect the treatment data with the research project. General ethical principles for moral acceptability of consent models in data-driven research. So here are some principles, and this is my last slide. As a very broad and general principle, you might say that the less risks and the less interventions involved in the research, the broader and the more remote the consent may be. So if you have little risks, minimal risks, and if you have no intervention at all in the body or almost no intervention, you may use a broad consent and communicate via remote maybe. However, if you do for secondary research use of treatment data, for data that is already been generated for treatment purposes, a broad consent can be acceptable. If you want to do an interventional clinical trial, of course, you need a specific informed consent and a physician that personally sees the patient and explains that. However, and I think that is something that was mentioned before in the introduction, you might combine the both. So you might have some kind of specific informed consent for the interventional trial and then ask at the same time or at a later point the patient for allowance to have a broad use of the patient of the research data from the research project for further sharing purposes. As a second very basic principle, in my ethical opinion, all stakeholders have a basic responsibility to share data to benefit future patients. So data sharing is key for advancing research and for improving therapies and diagnosis approaches in the future. So that is a basic obligation of all stakeholders, patients, physicians, researchers, stakeholders like hospitals and that stuff. And in all the whole process, of course, consent matters. Consent is important. There are different consent models, and consent is, of course, important, but it's not the whole story. And what is also very important is the governance in which the data sharing takes place. And this governance needs to be shaped by technical aspects, IT security, by ethical aspects and principles, and by legal aspects, and also by procedural aspects. For example, that there are additional review bodies like institutional review bodies or data use and access committees. So it must be a mixture of all to make sure that the data be stored in a responsible way and shared and used in a responsible way to advance research. Well, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schickhardt. Very interesting presentation, especially regarding the overview of a different type of informed consent and also the German experience. And I hope we will go through that in the discussion. That is very interesting for us to know. But now I will I'm glad to leave the floor to Carina Dantas. Carina Dantas is a breast cancer survivor, is a co-researcher involved in many different European projects, and she will bring up the perspective of both a person with an experience of disease and a researcher. So thank you, Carina, being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cinzia, and everyone for the kind invitation. I tried to learn a bit more about the project as well, and it's very interesting also already the presentations that you had so far. So I'm very glad that I was invited as well because of the possibility of getting to learn a bit more. 10 minutes is not that much to say or to talk about this topic, so I'll try to make it short, but also bringing a little bit of the let's say mixed perspectives that I can eventually bring here. As you mentioned, I had breast cancer in 2017. I already worked on research, but on a different level, let's say. And after the cancer experience, I actually decided to start my own company, Shine to Europe, and mostly working around the concepts of inclusive and applied research for the benefit of communities. I'm very happy to be involved in different projects, and in this case as researcher, but and this was also the link for the workshop today, to also be able to participate as patient advocate and co-researcher in other initiatives, and one of them is You on Call, where I have the pleasure to work with the team of Cinzia and other people here in the call, and where the experience has been really amazing in terms of putting patients working together with researchers and having some different dialogues deriving from there. So this means that on one side, well, these are the projects where I work as a researcher on cancer. So most of them are actually trying to bring multi-stakeholder engagement, social innovation practices, and putting together different types of ecosystems, discussing around trust and governance and stakeholder and policy within the breadth of cancer research. And of course, this is very much linked to the patient side of it. But from this, I probably can say that there is this kind of mixed experience. On one side, being on the research, on the researcher side, let's say, to see all of the difficulties that sometimes implementing clinical studies bring for the clinicians, for the researchers. It's a well, mostly I would say because of all of the regulatory context, it is really a hard work, and at the same time trying to bring the patients' voices and concerns and challenges also into this ecosystem is not that easy. And I think well, I really appreciate, for example, what you were presenting in the beginning with all of the different tools that are being made available for patients to participate, because of course this is essential, and it is essential for several reasons, but it's also difficult to make this bridge. So I do think that this connection is important, but I also appreciate the challenges of implementing it. While I was seeing a bit more about CCE DART, and I have to say this was not initially in my presentation, but I thought it would be interesting perhaps to give you a very short glimpse of one of the projects where I'm involved, which is READY. It's an IHI, so an innovative health initiative, which means that we have private and public partners, which aims exactly to have more representative and diverse participation in clinical trials. And I was checking some of the tools that you were presenting before and that I saw that were being developed and discussed in the project. And also looking at what we are doing at READY and thinking that I'm just mentioning it here, but possibly I will also put some participants here in contact, because I think there's a lot of benefits for some collaboration and getting to know each other in the two projects. Mostly the project aims to, as I was saying, promote the more participation from underserved and underrepresented populations into clinical studies. And this means that there's been a big study about what we understand about this, what are in fact the underserved and underrepresented communities in clinical studies, how to develop tools and make available other approaches and solutions to have them involved. And then of course, trying to improve that representation. And I think this links a lot with all of the discussions on secondary use of data and informed consent. And I would say, because from my experience, if you are a very informed, high literate patient, of course, you are sometimes a more difficult patient for the clinicians, I know. But at the same time, you are also more willing to understand these discussions and this tension, because what you want at the end is to have better care. Of course, that a more informed person very often also has more concerns about how their data is used. Trust sometimes also needs to be built on the understanding of all of the context, on having all of the information. But at the same time, the perspective of the potential use of this data for better research is much easier. However, at the same time, if you don't have the enough understanding or literacy, for example, it's very difficult to understand the consent form. I have to say my background is in law, and as a patient, very often I have difficulties in understanding consent forms. So I think this is really worrying, because if you look at a document and it is not clear to you, or if you hear all of the explanations that people give you, but at the end, if you try to, for example, explain it to your family, you understand that maybe you don't really know what will happen to the data, or all of the small practicalities of the process, then perhaps you are not being sufficiently or adequately informed. And the truth is that I participate in all of the studies that I can, that I think are of interest and of good purpose, but really very rarely I'm informed, for example, of what happened next. What were the results? How did things progress? If at the end there was any outcome or any impact of the research done. And for me, I think this is a pity. So on one side, I think, and this is said broadly by most patients, if I trust my doctor, if I trust the team where I'm being cared at, I usually accept to participate in a study. So trust is, of course, very important here. But then very often I see that the ethics and the consent forms are used as tick boxes. So we just want to have them fulfilled. And this is, of course, a big issue, because it would make it easier, especially considering secondary use of data, but also the continuous participation of patients in different clinical studies, that there was more clarification of what are the purposes of the study, what will happen next, how is your data important, and what it contributed in practice. If this happens, I think things would actually make it easier for having more people willing to participate and share their data in the future. So I think I more or less already mentioned this. Of course, there's a lot of benefits for a wide participation in clinical studies. There are a lot of benefits for being able to use the data, in this case, secondary use. And in principle, people are willing to share their health data, but a lot of them don't really understand what happens with it. Where is it stored? Who is using it, for which purpose, how the data is used, and also our disinformation society has made people very paranoid. So of course this is also an issue, is that people have some concerns, and this happens, for example, for insurance. If they are an oncology patient, they are concerned that the data that they were sharing for clinical research could somehow prejudice, hurt them in the future, for example, on financial decisions. So it is important that people can understand if the data is safe. And if so, this is possibly, let's say, it would solve a lot of complications, because if people understand why they are somehow allowing the data to be used, they will be very willing to having it used for the future. Of course, and I'm about to finish in two slides, especially on this part of the secondary data reuse. I would say from my side that in the different groups that I've been discussing this with patients, consent is really a problem. So it's very good if we are evolving now, and we are, on having different tools to allow people to better understand consent, to also having more dynamic use forms of consent. But not very often things are clear. The issue of proportionality should also be very clearly explained. It is very important to understand also how the governance of the data will be used. And if all of this is transparent, I do think that public trust will be enhanced and people will be willing to participate. So what can then be the main issue? Well, one relates to my initial point on you on call. It's good that patients are seen as partners and that more discussions with patients are done about this. I know this is now starting to happen more often, but it's still not fully, it's not mainstream, let's say. It is also very important to bring policymakers into this discussion. Now it's starting more on researchers, clinicians, and patients, but policymakers are very important to be included here as well, and to have this understanding that this can mean better healthcare. So just the final note on remote consent, because some of the issues I think that somehow bring problems in representation are perhaps more clear on remote consent. And some of them have to do, of course, with low literacy levels, not having personal interaction to understand what is being actually consented. Of course, digital exclusion is a big risk with this. On the other side, accessibility and inclusion of people that are, for example, from rural areas or that are further away from the health services would be really a big asset. So at the end, if we can complement technology for remote consent with human support and, of course, involve patients in the design of these tools, I think they would be would be really important to increase participation, to make clinical trials more accessible for people who are now underrepresented. And of course, we need to use technology for common good. So that's always, if that is always in the mind of the developers, this will eventually work out. This is my last slide. So trust, transparency, and motivation would be, I would say, what patients want in this discussion. And at the end, of course, that human values are at the center of everything we do in clinical research and ethical innovation. Thank you so much. I think I shared a lot of ideas and perhaps very, very short in time. So I hope they were clear, but I'll be happy to follow up and to connect further. And as mentioned, also to perhaps connect also this consortium to some of the other initiatives that are ongoing in Europe and that can be of mutual benefit.
No, thank you very much, Carina, Dantas. You were very, very clear, and thank you for bringing us the perspective of patient, also informed patient, as you said, and to bring the attention to the importance to rely on transparency and clarity to build a trust relationship that is useful and necessary also for remote consent and all the technological tools that should be used in research. So thank you very much. I invite the participants to write their comments and questions in the chat. We will read them later, but you can do it stay now. Carina, Dantas, are you staying with us till the end? That would be, I don't know if you can do it, otherwise we can, of course, send you all the questions that people would have regarding your presentation.
Yeah, as I mentioned today to Sarah, I was expecting to stay, but I was confused with the time difference because I'm in Cyprus, so I will actually need to leave earlier. Apologies for this, but you have my email, and I'll be very happy to further connect if that's okay.
That would be perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Irene Braña. Irene Braña is a medical oncologist, head of Head and Neck Cancer Group at the Negri Institute of Oncology in Spain. The VHIO is the coordinator of CCE DART, the European project. We collaborate in this project together. And so please, I leave the floor to you, Irene.
Thank you for your kind invitation. For me, it has been also a pleasure to collaborate with you and your institution. Can you see it in full screen or?
Yes, it is in full screen.
It's full screen, okay. So, as mentioned, I'm a physician. I work in both the early drug development unit. I'm the co-designer of the study basket of basket that we have used as a pilot for some of the points of DART. And I'm going to be giving my personal view on secondary use of data and remote informed consent. What I would like to share with you is why are some of the reasons I think that electronic informed consent is important. Uh, and for me, is first because we have seen that with platforms such as iEnter, we are able to provide information more visual and adapted to the patient needs, or at least that's the perception that we have had with the patients. And I'm going to share, this is the kind of explanation that I give, of course, in Spanish, but that's how the same information and what the genes are look like when I explain in my clinic and how it's participated in this clinical trial. So as you can see, definitely quite suboptimal, and the patients use lots of imagination to understand what I'm trying to explain to them. So the electronic world can help us with this. And in addition, okay, now I have crashed. It can also help highlighting the changes in the informed consent, and we can have a discussion after the patient has been able to go through the consent. We can have several iterations. It's much easier to highlight the changes, to discuss with the patient with this relevant, because we are giving the patients time to review it, and we can give it like more visual than when we give the clean informed consent without track changes. In addition, I think that it's important to support the centralized clinical trial, because as it was mentioned before, although technology can have some barriers and we don't want to have uh, um, any patient excluded, and it's true that probably because we live in the south of Europe and many patients have support from their families. So even with age or literacy, we haven't seen that much of a barrier. It can also help patients that are living far from our center. So for me, I'm not originally from Barcelona, so one of my concerns is if we are giving opportunities to patients in the rural area. So for example, my family originally comes from a rural area, and in their local hospital didn't offer um, a clinical trial to one of my relatives just for the fact of being in a rural community, while this patient contact and me and my colleagues, and we were able to find different options in different hospitals. So it's a way to avoid discrimination of patients just for the fact of living far from the centers that have more clinical trials. So this is the study basket of baskets that is explained in the iEnter. It's a platform study in which we do on one side molecular profiling of the archival tissue, and then once the patients enter in the study, more than half of the patients have undergone biopsies for translational research. And we try to implement iConsent with a platform that was created in the DART project. On one hand, to inform about reconsent, especially there are updates on the safety profile of the drugs involved. But there is also, we could see that there was an opportunity to discuss future research and give more details to those patients that are in follow-up. So we got a lot of support from the Spanish Medicine Agency because they are very interested on the centralizing clinical trials, and we saw that iConsent was the way to go. But we needed to have both the approval from the Medicines Agency and from the National Data Protection Office, which refer the evaluation to the Regional Data Protection Office in the region of Catalonia. And this evaluation took months during the project, and at the end, it was the Regional Data Protection Office considered that it was the regional health system, the one that needed to let know if we could use or not the I consent. And the answer was a complete no, basically because in our region, with the concern of you having an inadequate secondary use of data, there is enormous limitation on the patient medical records, including house services analysis. And because the I consent would need to be linked to the patient medical history, the regional health system include any kind of research in the same bag, and we couldn't implement I consent in Spain. My second point is that I think that feedback to patients is essential. I think on one hand to provide understandable information to patients, and also to provide immediate feedback to patients on things such as patient-reported outcomes. And in the part of provide feedback, as you have seen, we have put first the raw data, let's say the raw presentation of the clinical trial in both the iENTER webpage and the Basket of Basket page, webpage. And we have mimicked some other European groups in which they have the additional analysis of their studies there. And we think that it's something relevant to have it in lay terms, to have it publicly available, and to have it referenced in the informed consent. But we have concerns on the information that the ethical committees will allow us to mention, or the outsource that is not under their control and review. So I think it's something that I would like to know the feedback from other countries or the experience from other of the participants. And the other part is that it's important to provide feedback to the patient. And for example, with the patient-reported outcomes, we have lived for many, many years having unique directional communication. So the patient filled the questionnaires, and then this data went to the hospitals, to the clinicians, but there was no clear feedback to them. And this is the discussion that I have with a project that I'm going to show you that was an oral presentation at ESMO this year, showing how relevant having an interaction with a system that can, on one hand, have automatic responses, flag alerts, that they can facilitate the interaction between patient and physician. And this is a project, it's a project in head and neck cancer, because I also work in that area. And it was a late breaking abstract showing the primary endpoint analysis of this TransCan project, this Horizon 2020 project, BD for quality of life, in which some of the participants in this workshop have participated, and presented by Dr. Cavalieri, in which they show that using a platform that allows to have, on one hand, a interactive interaction from the patient, but also monitoring the patient passively, like by the movement in their cell phone. They could have they can tailor the intervention of this patient that have survived the head and neck cancer. And the idea is that they compare the standard follow-up just with quality of life questionnaires, or having this passive analysis with the application. And what they could see is that the use of this platform decreased the deterioration in the global health scale with a validated questionnaire. And it's very important because at least in the world of head and neck cancer, this was the first time that it was proved. And it's essential that we not only focus on collecting data from the patient, but that this data that we are generated, we provide immediate feedback to the patients and that we act on that. So to summarize my main points, I think that remote informed consent can facilitate the communication and interaction with patients, not only to explain secondary use of data, but also to explain other changes in informed consent, including safety, changes in procedures. It can facilitate the centralized clinical trials and decrease the disparities, the geographical disparities for patients. And that might take from the experience trying to implement consent in Spain, specifically in my regions, is that sometimes trying to protect the patients, regulations jeopardize that patients can access to research, innovation, and information. And lastly, I think that provide feedback to patients is important, provide information on the results on a way that is understandable. It's key, but also to provide immediate feedback to improve their symptoms and outcomes. So with that, I will stop sharing and we will have the discussion at the end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Braña. We will have a discussion at the end, and thank you also to presenting let's say, the successful experience in Spain, but we will talk also about the regulatory framework with further speaker, but also at the end in the discussion, so regarding different countries. And so thank you. And now we move and talk on the patient perspective. So we move to bring in the discussion patient perspective with Claudia Louati. That is, it's a pleasure to introduce you, Claudia Louati. It is the head of the policy of the European Patient Forum in Belgium. And so I'm very happy to have Dr. Louati here. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to this very interesting workshop. I'm learning a lot as well, so it's really good to be here. So indeed, I'm from the European Patients Forum. So who are we? Just a short slide of introduction. We are an independent, non-governmental umbrella organization of patient organizations across Europe and across disease areas. We have about 82 members that are either national coalitions of patients, so I think we represent now about 22 European countries, or disease-specific European umbrellas. So Alzheimer's Europe is one of our members, for example. And our vision is a Europe where patient organizations are valued partners in creating equitable, person-centered, accessible, sustainable healthcare systems based always on patients' unique expertise. So I have to say, I accepted your invitation because I find this topic very interesting. EPF has been very active in the debate around health data as part of the European health data space in particular. We haven't touched so much on the secondary use of clinical trials data, but I think it's an area of increasing importance. So I'll start with some initial considerations related to the sharing and the reuse of clinical trial data that goes very much hand in hand with the whole debate around increased transparency of clinical trial data. So I think in general, resharing, reuse of clinical trial data is seen as good for science, potentially a moral imperative in order to accelerate research towards new and better therapies. All the advances that we've made in medical research at the moment are based on data. And of course, we want data to continue to inform future research. And it's especially important in areas of high unmet medical need where patient populations are small and the data is difficult to collect in the first place. It's part of respect for the patients who volunteer in the trials, making sure that we make the best use of the data that they've provided as part of participating in this research. It limits the duplication of research, which generally is unethical. There is significant burden of participation in those trials, as I was saying, and it's important that we use the data that is already collected. A small note here, this goes hand in hand with the transparency of clinical trials generally, but also of negative trials. We should not just publish the results of trials that are successful, but also make sure that the negative results are available in order to limit the duplication. And I think in the context of secondary use, this is relevant as well. A lot of participants mentioned the importance of feedback, and this is very much welcome from our perspective. There is still some improvement needed in general in terms of individuals' right of access to their own data. Of course, we see a lot of opportunities with the European Health Data Space, the ability potentially to link the research data and the health records of participants, of individuals, but there is still much improvements needed. So in general, you know, these are considerations on the reuse of clinical trial data, the need for transparency, which in the end is vital for generating and maintaining trust of patients and the wider public in medical research. Of course, there are a lot of benefits to secondary use, but there is a need for a strict framework as well for the reuse and the secondary use of clinical trial data. So, of course, protection of patient confidentiality and privacy is key. Here, I think we need to have a discussion, you know, on how much data as part of clinical trials can or cannot be anonymized. Frankly, I don't think they can be anonymized or pseudonymized, which raises the questions of who will use that data, reuse that data, and for what purpose, of course. And here, for us, it's very important that this public health aspect remains and that the data is reused for public health purposes. This links to the need to define what kind of data sharing and reuse would be considered to fall within the scope of previous informed consent. I won't go into detail on this because some previous speakers have already mentioned the importance of consent, broad consent in particular. In terms of reconsent, so having to consent again to the use of the data potentially through online tools, I will mention one thing, which is really the need to ensure equity and not to create new exclusions. You know, there are a number of people who don't have the necessary digital health or literacy really, and the awareness to be able to use those tools, and of course ensuring that people understand, you know, when they consent remotely or when they use electronic ways of consenting is important. I want to quickly touch upon the opt-out to secondary use of data in the European health data space, because of course, you know, clinical trials data is one of the categories of data that is supposed to be shared as part of the EHDS. And as EPF, we were strongly involved in this debate around the opt-out and the need to operationalize this concept, because of course, we don't want it to be an impediment to sharing of data. We want it to really be an opportunity for patients to understand how their data is used. So in terms of how to make it happen in practice, we want a clear and transparent mechanism, and we want clear and easily understandable information on the implications of sharing or not sharing or deciding not to share the data. So all in all, this relates to the importance of meaningful informed consent. As Carina was saying earlier, at the moment, it's still very much a tick box exercise. So in this context, specifically of reuse and secondary use of data, patient information really is key, and ensuring that the information provided is legible and understandable is very important. A very short ad really for one of our initiatives, which is Data Saves Lives, which is an initiative that we launched, I think, 6 years ago now, in order to increase awareness of digital health data and understanding of the importance of health data. This is really an initiative targeted to individuals, of course, but also to patient organizations to help them train patients and communicate, about the importance of health data within a framework that is ethical and has strong safeguards. So we published last year a toolkit specifically on the European health data space to explain what the differences between primary and secondary use and how to go about it. I don't know why I moved so fast, but I was more or less done with this slide. So some final considerations. Thank you very much for your attention. So of course, data digitalization speed up innovation. And we do believe in the power of data to really shape the healthcare systems and the products of the future. At the same time, this innovation must serve patients' needs. It's important that the research is done for public health purposes and that patients remain at the center of this digital health revolution. We believe as EPF that patients must be involved across the research continuum, so really from defining the medical need to the very end and the pharmacovigilance and all in all. I was very pleased to see the course that you developed on patient and public involvement. We also have developed some tools in the past to help researchers make that happen in practice, in particular as part of the Paradigm project. So patient involvement improves the quality of the research and the evidence collected. It's important that patients are involved in developing the endpoints, for example, that are collected as part of clinical trials and that they highlight those outcomes that matter to them. Patients provide the information and ultimately manage the personal risks attached to participation in trials, so their involvement is a democratic imperative in that sense. And then I will echo again what Carina was saying in terms of the need for stronger focus on diversity and inclusion. Of course, it's great to reuse clinical trial data, but we need to ensure that the clinical trial data that we have is as good as it can be. And we need to improve the quality, obviously, of the evidence that is collected in research and ensure that it's representative of the whole population of who will use the products. And in that sense, the READY project plays an important part. Patient involvement as well in the digital transformation, as I was saying, so in the governance of the European health data space, in particular of the governance of those bodies that will be part of this debate around secondary use, promotion of digital health literacy programs, as I was saying, and of course patient preferences matter. So it's all great to digitalize, but there are a lot of patients that actually also still need the human contact, so we should not use the human touch and the importance of the patient-doctor relationship. I was last week at the final event of the Trials at Home project, which is a very interesting project, but actually identified some issues in terms of really motivating patients to participate in the remote arm of the trial. And it's not as easy as one can be, and not as cheap also as one can imagine. And then finally, of course, all of this under strict safeguards, and we need state-of-the-art data protection and cybersecurity to ensure that patients have the trust that there won't be any breaches and that their data and personal information will be protected. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dr. Louati, especially to have presented some points of discussion regarding the European health data space. And that will be another point that we will discuss later, but it's very important also in the framework of clinical trials, of course. And now we will move on to the regulatory framework for e-consent in clinical trials, especially thanks to Federica Menichini's presentation. So I will leave the floor to Dr. Menichini. She works at the Italian Medicine Agency in Italy in the GCP Inspectorate Office. Federica and Dr. Menichini, the floor is yours.
I tried to share my presentation. Can I show? You can show my presentation?
Yes, we can see it, not in the presentation mode. If I see, yes, that's perfect now. Thank you.
Sorry.
No? Okay, no,
No,
but no problem
okay.
because
Oops.
that's fine.
Okay, just okay. It's okay. Hi, good
Perfect.
afternoon. Thank you for your invitation. Today I will talk about the concept implementation of electronic informed consent in the context of clinical trial. I'm a GCP inspector, senior, and I'm a pharmacist. This is my public declaration for transparency and interest. In this slide, you can see the main pillar of the regulatory framework for electronic informed consent. EU Regulation 536/2014, ACH Good Clinical Practice Revision 3, and GDPR, National Ethical and Legal Requirements. Each member state may have additional provision that must be observed. Behind the EU regulation and international guideline, sponsor must comply with the country-specific law and ethics committee requirements. The key principle is regardless of whether consent is electronic or paper-based, its quality and integrity must remain the same. EU regulation established the legal framework for clinical trial in the European Union and explicitly support the use of digital tools for informed consent under Article 29. Article 29 states, where the subject is enabled to write consent may be given and recorded through appropriate alternative means in the presence of at least one impartial witness. It's important to highlight that the electronic signatures are allowed as long as they comply with the applicable regulation, and the consent is not one-time events. It must be a continuous process, ensuring participants are informed whenever new relevant information becomes available. The updated ACH GCP R3 guideline emphasizes the modernization of informed consent process, including electronic methods, while maintaining the same ethical principle as traditional paper-based consent. Section 2.8.1 states that when obtaining and documenting informed consent, whether in paper or electronic format, the investigator must comply with the applicable regulatory requirements and adhere to GCP and ethical principles originating from the Declaration of Helsinki. E-consent and remote consent procedures are explicitly recognized and legitimized under GCP, provided that three key conditions are met: comprehensibility, voluntariness, and documentation. The guideline encourages the use of technologies such as tablet, video call, and electronic signature to obtain consent when appropriate. However, it is essential that participants always have the opportunity to ask a question and confirm their understanding of the study before giving consent. Under the GDPR, consent serves as legal basis for processing personal and sensitive data in clinical trial. Specifically, Article 6.1 and Article 9.2 outline the consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. In the context of e-consent, this means that participants must be clearly informed about what data is being collected, how it will be used, and their rights regarding the data. These rights include access to the data, the ability to rectify inaccuracies, the right to erasure, and the data portability. Additionally, systems used for e-consent must be ensure robust data security measures and maintain an audit trail to document consent activities. These requirements are critical to ensure that the digital consent process align with the GDPR and protect participant privacy. In addition to the previously mentioned reference, EU regulation, ACH, GCP, and GDPR, another key document is the EMA guideline on computerized system and electronic data in clinical trial. This guideline provides detailed requirements for Ethics Committee must review and approve all material related to the consent process. Sponsors are responsible for ensuring that the consent procedure comply with the good clinical practice and the national requirements. Importantly, the principle of informed consent remains the same whether the process is electronic or paper-based. Hybrid approach can be used when the national regulation requires a paper signature linking the electronic information and the signed document. In some countries, failure to provide written proof of consent is still considered a legal violation. E-consents involve using digital media such as text, graphic, audio, or video to provide trial information and document consent electronically. The process should allow participants to ask questions and receive answers before signing electronically or on paper. Alternative methods must be available for those enabled on unwilling to use electronic system. If a consent is used exclusively, this must be justified and described in the trial protocol. In conclusion, electronic form and consent is a rapidly evolving field, especially with the growing use of digital technology in healthcare. However, its practical implementation still raises several uncertainties. Current guidelines provide a strong ethical and procedural framework, but they don't offer detailed instruction on how to apply them in practice. For instance, they don't specify which tools should be used to verify identity, how to handle participants' questions, or how to assess understanding. There are also unresolved issues such as the legal validity of electronic signature, which can vary across country. Another concern is assuring accessibility for people who can't or don't want to use digital tools. And finally, documenting a remote interaction, like a video call or chat, raises questions about data integrity and traceability. This challenge shows the need for ongoing discussion, clearer regulation, and reliable technological solution to make electronic consent both ethically sound and practically feasible. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Menichini, and thank you for having give us this overview of the framework, regulatory framework for electronic consent. Now, the crucial role of a regulatory agency, we know that very well, but another crucial role is played by the ethical committees. And so now I invite to speak Professor Paolo Casali, that is the director of a medical oncology unit 2 at Fondazione Istituto Nazionale dei Tumori in Milan, and is also head of the technical and scientific secretariat of the Lombardia for Territorial Ethics Committee. So he will bring us the perspective of both the oncologists, researchers, and also ethic committee experts, let's say. Thank you, Professor Casali.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Yes.
Well, thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Okay. No, because I'm in Rome. I'm not in Milan at the moment. Okay. So thanks for asking me to join. On behalf of an ethics committee, I mean, in my capacity of a physician who coordinates the scientific secretariat of an ethics committee of our region in Milan, Regione Lombardia, an ethics committee which is hosted by my institute in Milan. But I would like to, first of all, to disclose what I believe as a clinical researcher about all this. I must say that my views are very much consistent with what we wrote when I was the chair of the Public Policy Committee of ESMO, the European Society for Medical Oncology, when the GDPR was discussed at the European Parliament and then during the trialogue. We wrote a position paper at the beginning of the discussion on behalf of the whole oncology community, European oncology community, basically advocating a kind of one-time consent, which could be a fully informed consent, which could be withdrawable, which could be patient-tailored, so a kind of tailored consent to the willingness of the individual patient, of course, subject to any kind of ethical scrutiny, and then subject, of course, to any laws and rules about data protection. And I must say that the final text of the GDPR has a recital, the recital 33, which was agreed upon trying to recognize that the one-time consent should be acknowledged as a possibility at least. And then our other point was of course, a kind of derogation from consent for data of registries, of public registries like cancer registries, for example. Without a derogation, clearly they cannot survive. And then there is another recital in the GDPR pointing to this issue. By the way, the one-time consent is foreseen by the clinical trials regulation. This was another point on which ESMO advocated extensively during the discussion of the clinical trials regulation. So the sponsor can ask a kind of one-time consent to the patient entering a clinical trial to the reuse of his or her data, so the secondary use of data for subsequent research. Then, soon after the implementation of the GDPR, we were a little bit surprised that then Article 29 Working Party, which is now the European Data Protection Board of the European Union, which collects the national authorities, the data protection authorities, in practice said that, okay, recital 33 is there, but doesn't mean that you can really implement a kind of one-time consent. And so we expressed our disappointment by this interpretation of the data protection authorities of the European Union in this position paper entitled "A Major Step Forward with a Step Back." So coming back to how an ethics committee today may, provide its opinions about the secondary use of data for subsequent research. Yeah, okay, in an ethics committee, you have different perspectives, of course. You have physicians, researchers, you have patients, you have lawyers, you have data protection experts, insurance experts, experts in bioethics. So it's obvious that anyone, all of them carry their perspective. And so the problem is how to interpret the GDPR, how to interpret the ethical rule that clearly patients must express a consent on whatever is done on their data, not only on their body. But at the same time, which kind of consent? So in practice, the problem is the specificity of the consent. The data protection authorities are very restrictive in interpreting the specificity of the consent, and the ethics committee may often make some compromise. So which kind of specificity is needed? Is it enough to say future research on your disease or on the drug foreseen by the protocol, the trial in which you entered or not? And then there are other technicalities, one of which is pseudonymization, because clearly, there is a recent ruling of the Court of Justice of the EU on September 25, which says that if a pseudonymization is such as to avoid in practice the recognition of the patient. I mean, this data should be considered anonymized, not only pseudonymized. So this is another kind of technicality which is so crucial, so important today, and on which ethics committee may differ from each other. But because the problem is very simple, I think that the GDPR was created as a regulation, as you know, so not a directive, substituting a directive, because a regulation should apply evenly in the same way in all member states. As a matter of fact, this didn't happen. As a matter of fact, the GDPR is interpreted by member states, also by regions. I mean, we heard the Spanish experience earlier. So it's interpreted differently across the member states. By the way, this is a big problem for European research because clearly sometimes it's better to have the same interpretation, even if it's not the best one, but at least it's the same in order to allow European research. So a discrepant interpretation is such that in any case, I mean, whatever the interpretation, it clearly creates a problem. And finally, I would like to recall that a restrictive interpretation of the specificity of the consent in practice means that you have the right to say no, but you don't have the right to say yes. Because if your consent needs to be specific, extremely specific, you cannot give a broad consent. So, I mean, this is about freedom of individuals. So something like the data protection rules, which are there to assure citizens' freedom. So freedom from intrusion in their data. Actually, if you interpret restrictively the specificity of the informed consent to the reuse of data for health research, in practice, you are not implementing freedom. You are restricting citizens' freedom. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Casali. This interesting insights, and we will discuss, I think, later also regarding which kind of consent a patient could provide or would like to provide. But and also regarding this, your comments regarding the freedom of citizens to decide if they want to share their data broadly. Now I leave the floor to Alexandre Yazigi. It is an executive director of medical affairs and clinical data at Resilience Care in France.
Yes.
Dr. Yazigi, I can
you
see
hear me?
you. Yes, well.
Yes.
Okay. Nice to meet you, please.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for inviting us to present the work we are trying to do here at Resilience. So I would like to try to give a quick and broad view about remote patient monitoring and how we try to integrate digital tool in from routine care to clinical trials. So a little journey back in time when historically oncologists have focused on overall survival as the ultimate endpoint, and extending life was the primary goal, and of course rightly so. In the 90s, field began to evolve, and we realized that quantity of life wasn't enough, quality mattered too. This understanding led to the creation of robust tools such as the ORTC QRQ C30, which was published in '93 for the first time for lung cancer, and which systematically measures patients' quality of life and how treatment affected their daily well-being. Fast forward to today, and the shift has gone even deeper. It is now recommended to capture patients' reported outcome. These are essentially for understanding the full therapeutic reality. So toxicity, fatigue, pain, diarrhea. These should not be just clinical side notes. They define how the patient actually experiments treatment, and thanks to digital technology, we can measure them in real time between visits, bringing patients' perspective to the center of clinical research and routine care. But why? Where does it come from? Ethan Bash published in 2009 a paper showing that symptoms are underreported almost twofold by HCPs when you compare this to what patients can self-report. So this is true for routine care, as Ethan Bash showed, but it has been published and demonstrated that it is also true for expert and well-trained teams, such as those who works in early phases trial centers. And this is due to multiple patient and physician bias. So how do we integrate the patient perception and other data points to capture the complete therapeutic reality that could change clinical and pharmacological decision? This is where remote patient monitoring come into play, and where initiatives like Resilience try to bridge that gap. Because now evidence has shown the impact of RPM on clinical outcome. It reduces the rates of severe toxicities by approximately 25%. It achieves a similar reduction in emergency and hospitalization visits. It shortens by an average of 1.6 days the hospitalization duration. And interestingly, and it will have impact on clinical research, it extends the duration of treatment by around 1.9 months. So at the end, it increases the overall survival by 5.2 months and the quality of life by 88%. So yeah, it has some clinical benefits. It is great, but this is possible only if you have patients' adherence and engagement. And as it has been said before, we have to be careful about these things that are non-minor parts. Because engagement doesn't happen by accident. It's not enough to give a patient an app or a wearable. They need to feel connected, supported, and empowered. It has to be something more and not instead of the usual care. So this is the difference basically between ePro as it was before and remote patients monitoring. So real engagements requires a comprehensive digital ecosystem that links patients to the care team, provides meaningful feedbacks, and gives them access to trusted, relevant content that helps them on a daily basis. We need also to screen for social and behavioral frailty to ensure that clinical research does not left people behind. When patients see that their input directly inform their care, adherence naturally increases and data quality also improves, as we published last year. So in short, engagement is designed and not wished for. Sorry. So with all this, it creates these rich data streams of longitudinal sensitive payrolls. And combined with wearables, clinical notes, we obtain these high-dimensional databases capable of revealing new patterns in tolerability, response, and long-term outcome. And these data are valuable not only for clinical care, but also clinical research and enabling more accurate data-driven insights. And as we said little bit before, LPM, it increases treatment duration by 1.9 months by, let's say, denoising the treatment efficacy and increasing the tolerability of the treatment. So why don't you use this RPM data for dose selection in early phases trial? It has been shown by Christine Ziap's team that dose-limiting toxicity is not informed the same way when you incorporate a PRO, and it can change the dose level you select. And this is one of the points of the Project Optimus launch by the FDA. So RPM allows the real-time toxicity alert, helping investigators respond earlier to side effects. This helps refine recommended phase 2 doses and ensuring those are both effective and tolerable patients. So we can reduce patients' risk by detecting more subtle toxicity sooner because we detect more low-grade toxicities, and we help define tolerability thresholds and even increases dose exposure safely when and if appropriate. So combined with real-world data, this digital insight can help create synthetic control arm, reducing the need for traditional comparators and speeding up, we hope, early phases studies. So it's a powerful illustration of how digital monitoring is becoming a key enabler for regulatory and clinical decision making. And now, as we see on a daily basis in the news and using the new technologies that arrive, we are entering a new area of technology and new phases when EHR data, EDC systems, and digital phenotyping are converging. By integrating structured and unstructured data sources, we can build a better profile of each participant, each patient in a clinical trial. And this holistic, multidimensional patient profiles allows for deeper analysis and treatment effects and personalized care pathway. We are convinced that this is most certainly one of the branch of the future precision oncology with multi-omics data analysis. So, for resilience, we were born in Gustave Roussy in Paris. We are soon going to start working with the VHIO in Barcelona. And we would love to start working and discuss with other centers from the Cancer Core Europe network. So if you want to discuss with this, we would be happy to discuss with anyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yazigi, especially for your projects in patient-reported outcome that are very, very interesting. So thank you very much. Now we move to the concept within the CCE DART project and how it was developed and so all the process of development. I leave the floor to Mirko Orsini, that is the CEO of DataRiver, the company that works on it and partner of the CCE DART project. Please, Mirko, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation to this workshop. DataRiver is a contract research organization, is a partner of the CCE DART project. We have been in charge together with the other partner of the development of the iConsent platform for remote management of informed consent. So just a couple of words about Our company will provide innovative solutions for clinical trials, especially for decentralized clinical trials, patient support programs, telemedicine, pathology and rare disease registry to pharma and biotech companies, clinical research institute and hospital. And we are specialized in designing and developing web and mobile software solution for clinical data management, clinical data integration in clinical trial and research project. In collaboration with Istituto Nazionale Tumori and other CCE partner, we designed and developed the iConsent tool for remote informed consent, together with the other tools I enter and I participate that have been already presented. We implement a secure and flexible remote informed consent workflow in iConsent with a user-friendly web and mobile interface design. And another important requirement was the compliance with data integrity principle, the ALCOA++ principle, and all the regulatory requirements. And the e-signature validation and security. First of all, the platform implements a secure and flexible remote informed consent workflow in all the phases of the informed consent process, with flexibility to have, for example, face-to-face meeting or virtual meeting discussion of informed consent with subject. And also for the signature, we implemented in the platform the feature for the digitalization and storage of wet ink signature, and we implemented the qualified electronic signature. The platform is a web and mobile platform. The web application
Sorry, Mirko, you're mute. I can't hear you. Or maybe he's frozen. Can you hear me, all?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, so the problem is
Yeah.
that Mirko,
Yes.
I think, is frozen. He has some problems with the line. I can try to contact him.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear well, yes.
Oh, sorry.
But we lost you at this slide. iConsent, and you were showing the test.
Okay, so I will try to reconnect also by. Seems I have a connection problem, but I can go on with the audio without the slides. So we implemented a web platform for clinician and research teams, and a mobile platform for patients to manage the informed consent remotely. And regarding the security levels and the legal effect, a prerequisite by the EMA is that the system used have a proportionate security levels and that safeguards regarding confidentiality. And the recommendation is to use a qualified electronic signature as in the decentralized clinical trial to have the equivalent legal effect of an handwritten signature. So we implemented in the iConsent platform the qualified electronic signature with the qualified certificates issued by a certified and trusted provider in compliance with the EIDAS regulation. And we implemented all the process integrating the service for the qualified electronic signature with a temporary disposable remote certificate given by a message, an OTP message to the patient, so very easy to use for the patients. And another important entry to the platform, the physician, clinician, researcher can have access to the state of the informed consent. Sorry, just a second. I will try to reconnect also the video. And
so Mirko, tell us if you want us to share the screen. Okay, I see something there. Otherwise, you can send me your slide set and I can try to, that is there. Okay, perfect. We can.
So this is regarding the electronic signature, the qualified electronic signature, and with the integration with an external provider for the electronic signature, we implemented the feature of electronic signature by an OTP code sent to the patients, and in the platform, researcher can have access to the informed consent signed by a patient directly on the platform, and then we ensure the traceability of all the informed consent process during all the life cycle of the informed consent during all the trial and after the trial, with a functionality of audit trail. So all the information are stored on the platform. The subject and clinician can sign and countersign the informed consent, and they can and the patient can withdraw the informed consent. So just a final comment on the implementation of this iConsent platform. iConsent can enhance the possibility for patient to be more informed during all the process during the clinical trial, and the informed consent process, the remote one, can enable the possibility for secondary use of data, but also for the change we can have on the informed consent during the trial or for other future trials. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirko Orsini from DataRiver, that for this presentation explaining the details of how we have implemented iConsent, and then we can discuss also some aspects of this process in our session for discussion.